First, we have a recent controversy involving actor Bradley Cooper that you may have already heard about. He's going to be starring as the famous conductor Leonard Bernstein is it Bernstein or Bernstein? Anyway, reminds me of the Mandela effect with the Berenstain versus Berenstein Bear thing. I should do an episode on the Mandela effect someday. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it's Leonard Bernstein. I almost said Leonard Berenstain, the great Ursine composer.
Leonard Bernstein?
Thank you, man who lives in my computer. That's what I thought. He didn't sound too confident about it, though, did he? He was like, Leonard Bernstein? Like he was taking his best guess. But that was a pronunciation I looked up on YouTube, kidding aside. But let's try this again. So Bradley Cooper, is going to be starring as the famous conductor Leonard Bernstein in an upcoming movie simply entitled Maestro, I believe. The controversy comes in because Cooper, who is of Irish and Italian descent, so pretty much the same as me, he wears a prosthetic nose in the film to look more like Bernstein, who was Jewish. The somewhat inflammatory or jarring hashtag, and please forgive me ahead of time, quote-unquote Jew face, began trending on social media, and I'm a big fan of Larry David and his show Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he used to often reference the fact that he was Jewish on the show. And I remember one episode, he had this adversarial relationship with his manager's wife. It was Susie, right, I think? And they got into an argument over who had more of a quote-unquote Jew face. But in the context of this story, the term, once again, forgive me, quote-unquote Jew face, this might be the most awkward, unintentional, weakened-out drinking game word or phrase in the whole history of the podcast. Anyway, the term wasn't trending as a slur or insult. It was meant, at least I hope not, it was meant to draw a comparison to so-called blackface. Some people were upset by what they saw as a non-Jewish person wearing a large prosthetic nose in order to appear more Jewish. There were even some suggesting it was anti-Semitic. But Bernstein's children actually came out and defended Bradley Cooper, saying that he had worked with the Bernstein family throughout the process of preparing for the role and that he was very respectful, etc. I'll read a bit from this article. But actually, before I read it, I'll just quickly read some headlines that I took a screenshot of. So there's one from Slate magazine, the Bradley Cooper quote-unquote Jew face, drink up, Mazel Tov controversy is about more than Leonard Bernstein's nose. And then Deadline, Maestro nose controversy. Leonard Bernstein's children defend Bradley Cooper's use of prosthetics. Newsweek, is Bradley Cooper's prosthetic nose anti-Semitic? And so this is actually that Deadline article, and it's dated August 16th. And so it's entitled, Maestro Nose Controversy, Leonard Bernstein's Children Defend Bradley Cooper's Use of Prosthetics. And so it begins, Bradley Cooper was hit pretty much immediately with controversy as he unveiled a first look at his forthcoming Netflix pick, Maestro, when the internet encountered the large prosthetic nose he adopted to portray legendary composer and conductor Leonard Bernstein. But Bernstein's children have now come to his defense. And here's a quote, Bradley Cooper included the three of us along every step of his amazing journey as he made his film about our father, wrote Jamie Alexander and Nina Bernstein in a statement posted to their late father's X page, I guess Twitter, that's a whole other can of worms. We were touched to the core to witness the depth of his commitment, his loving embrace of our father's music, and the sheer open-hearted joy he brought to his exploration. It breaks our hearts, the trio continued, to see any misrepresentations or misunderstandings of his efforts. It happens to be true that Leonard Bernstein had a nice big nose. Bradley chose to use makeup to amplify his resemblance, and we're perfectly fine with that. The Bernsteins further expressed their belief that their father would have been quote unquote fine with the use of prosthetics, and that, once again in quotes, any strident complaints around this issue are perhaps disingenuous attempts to bring a successful person down a notch, a practice we observed all too often perpetrated on our own father. At all times during the making of this film, we could feel the profound respect and, yes, the love that Bradley brought to his portrait of Leonard Bernstein and his wife, our mother, Felicia. We feel so fortunate to have had this experience with Bradley, and we can't wait for the world to see his creation. My personal take, this is a very strange and nuanced case. I honestly don't think Bradley Cooper or anyone involved meant any ill will, quite the opposite. And you could argue, in a sense, that Cooper probably wasn't wearing a prosthetic nose because he wanted to look more Jewish, but he was wearing a prosthetic nose because he wanted to look more like Leonard Bernstein specifically, who happened to be Jewish. On the other hand, and this is one of the first things that occurred to me when I first heard this story, Bradley Cooper kind of naturally already has a strong or prominent nose of his own. He's a good looking guy. I'm not saying he has a big nose. It fits his face, but it's kind of a strong nose. He probably could have easily gotten away without wearing a prosthetic and still would have looked close enough to Bernstein. And just recently we had Oppenheimer, where we had another Gentile actor playing a Jewish person. Is it Cillian Murphy? Is that how you pronounce it? As Robert Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer had a more pronounced nose and kind of different facial features than the actor playing him. But I think Murphy still did a good job of capturing the essence of Oppenheimer. And he had that kind of haunted look in his eyes that Oppenheimer had, at least in that famous clip that I've always found very moving, where the real Oppenheimer, quoting the Bhagavad Gita, says, "And now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," which they do have him say a couple of times in the film. And yet I think it lacked the gravitas of the real Oppenheimer saying it in that famous clip I just mentioned. And I think Cillian Murphy and Bradley Cooper are both charismatic and talented actors. I really like them both, but makes you wonder why they wouldn't have tried to find actual Jewish actors for the parts, which in fairness, maybe they did, but, if not out of principle, then at least cynically to try to avoid this kind of controversy or backlash. I think I've heard before that sometimes higher-ups at a studio will insist on casting big-name actors in an attempt to draw people to the box office. So it could have been partly that phenomenon, influencing the casting too. And I feel bad even criticizing or questioning the casting because they're both, once again, talented actors who I like. But yeah, makes you wonder though, you have these prominent Jewish figures that they're making biopics about. Why not try to find a Jewish actor? But another thing about the prosthetic nose, even though Bradley Cooper wanted to wear it out of dedication to the role, you would think someone involved might go, wait, there's kind of this anti-Semitic stereotype that Jews all have big noses. Maybe this isn't a great idea. And once again, Cooper already has a kind of pronounced or strong enough nose that he probably didn't even need the prosthetic. So why take the chance when someone should have known it might be seen as offensive? I don't know. And a strange thing that occurred to me is how, it's funny, you can just get away with something like this, a person wearing a fake nose to look more like a person of a different ethnicity. But say if a white actor darkened their skin to look more like someone else of a different race or ethnicity, especially a black or African person, that definitely wouldn't fly. I think the last example of that I can remember was Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder, which was meant to be satirical, and even that was seen as rather controversial at the time. And I think there's a couple of reasons why blackface is considered more taboo or less acceptable. One is the existence in relatively recent history of racist phenomena like minstrel shows, where you had white performers donning blackface, or exaggerated caricatures of black people used in advertising, etc. I think another reason why you can kind of squeak by with something like this is in modern times, Jewish people are now generally viewed as white, even though there are some exceptions. There's Ethiopian Jews, for instance, and there's the fact that Jewishness refers to being part of an ethno-religious group with roots that go back to the ancient Middle East. But once again, I think Jewish people are generally considered white, so a white person wearing a prosthetic to look more like another white person might not necessarily seem as jarring or taboo as a white person wearing blackface, but I can still see why some Jewish people might be offended by it because it does play into Jewish stereotypes. The Middle Ages were rife with anti Semitism, and there were pogroms, and Jewish people were further marginalized and persecuted. You even had Christian mobs killing Jews, all sorts of lurid rumors about Jewish people poisoning wells and having horns and blood libel and all of that ugly stuff. And you can look at medieval art and find a lot of just offensive caricatures of Jewish people, often depicted with large noses, etc. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to speculate or assert that this long history of anti-Semitism probably culminated in one of history's worst nightmares, the Holocaust, where roughly 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were systematically murdered, along with millions of non-Jews as well, such as homosexuals, Romani, prisoners of war, etc. And so, although the Jews weren't the only target of the Nazi regime, they had, or you could say one of their main goals was the attempted elimination, the genocide of the Jewish people. And I think what allowed a whole nation to go along with that is that they were primed by this long history of anti-Semitism. And so I think these kind of stereotypes still hit a nerve for many Jewish people. And so I can get why this type of thing, the prosthetic nose, etc., still rubs some people the wrong way, or why they might find it concerning. And I can already hear someone out there saying, but some Jewish people really do have big noses. Yeah, some do, many don't, and there's many non-Jews who have prominent noses. I used to be one of them. I haven't talked about this in a while. Like I alluded to earlier, I'm mostly Irish and Italian, and I inherited a prominent nose that I was self-conscious about growing up, even well into adulthood. And when I was around 29, my truck at the time got totaled, and I used the money to get a septo-rhinoplasty. It was basically two procedures in one. I had a bad deviated septum fixed, and at the same time, a plastic surgeon shaved down the bump or hump on the ridge of my nose, or the bridge of my nose, rather, to make it straighter or less prominent. Would I do it again? I don't know. It came out pretty good. I definitely would at least have the deviated septum still fixed. Definitely improve my breathing, but back on track. I just found this Leonard Bernstein, Bradley Cooper controversy kind of strange or interesting, and I felt inspired to cover it. And Bradley Cooper seems like a good dude. I think he was just trying to be dedicated to his craft and probably just want to do as good a job as possible portraying Leonard Bernstein. Probably didn't need the prosthetic though. Anyway, next story.